Okay, here in this video, we're going to look at interpreting the coefficients of our linear functions in context some applications. So we're going to be given some applications in the equation of the problem, I guess, per se, of the linear function is going to be given, and we want to interpret what this certain parts mean, either the y-intercept, the slope, or maybe even the x-intercept of the problem. So here on the first problem on the top left-hand side, we have Jason sells computers in an electronics store. His base pay amount each day. He makes a base pay, and then he's given a commission as a percentage of the total dollar amount the company makes or sells on that day. This equation here, 100 plus 0.03x, represents the total pay on the day in which he sells X dollars worth of computers. So we want to know, what is the y-intercept of the equation? Well, our equation here, P equals, if I write it in just rearrange the terms, 0.03x plus 100, that's y equals mx plus b form, where the 100 is the y-intercept. So the y-intercept is 100. Now, in context of this problem, what does that mean? Well, the y-intercept is when x is equal to x is equal to 0, p is equal to 100. Well, x means that he sells X dollars worth of computers. So if he sells nothing when x is 0, he still makes $100. So in context of this problem, $100 is his base pay. Now let's look at the next one here. So this next problem, we have Elizabeth left her house in the morning. Her cell phone battery was only partially charged. The charge remaining in the battery as a percentage is modeled by this function of b. So negative 5t plus 40, where t is the number of hours since she left her house. We want to know, what is the x-intercept of this equation? Well, we cannot easily identify the x-intercept of this equation because our slope-intercept form only tells us the slope and the y-intercept. The x-intercept in this case is going to be when the function equals 0, and so I have to solve for t. So I'm going to set the equation equal to 0, and then I would solve for t there. And this is one of the ones I don't have a whole lot of room, but I would subtract 40 to the other side and divide by 5, or excuse me, divide by negative 5. So if I minus the 40, I'd have negative 40 equals negative 5 times t. Divide by negative 5. And we get t is going to equal 8. So what does that mean in this problem? So when b equals 0, which is her battery, so the battery equals 0 when t equals 8. Well, t, it says, and is the number of hours after she left. So interpretation of this problem, the battery lasted 8 hours. All right, let's look at interpreting another problem here. So another word problem where we're given the equation. So each morning, Camden uses a gift card to buy a cup of coffee. The amount of money left in the coffee is given by the equation negative 3.5x. Negative 3.5x plus 35. What is the slope of the equation? Well, that's in y equals mx plus b form, where m is the slope, so negative 3.50 is the slope. What is the interpretation of that in context of the problem? Well, we're given a is the amount of money that's left remaining after you buy X cups of coffee. So every time I buy a cup of coffee, I change the number for X, which means that's what I multiply to 350. The 350 is actually the cost of a cup of coffee. So the cost of a cup of coffee. All right, now let's work on interpreting coefficients from a graph. Now we're given the graph. We're actually going to have to write an equation from the graph. We haven't done that in a couple of videos. So let's look at what we have. This first problem here, where Jackson borrowed some money from a friend to buy a video game. Jackson agreed to pay his friend back some money every week until he paid all the money back. L is how much money the loan. L represents the amount of money Jackson owes his friend after T weeks. Let me zoom in. We get the graph here. So we want to start by writing the equation of L. So we're going to use y equals mx plus b form. But instead of the y-axis, we have the L-axis. So it's going to be L equals. Now the y-intercept here, or the L-intercept of this problem is 10. So that means B is going to be 10. So I'm going to say plus 10 here. Now, the x-intercept, or the x-axis in this case, is t. So I'm not going to use x. I'm going to use t. Now I got to get my slope. So rise over run. Now they give me dots here. So I'm going to find my change in y. I go down 2, right 1. So my slope is equal to negative 2 over 1. So my slope is negative 2. So we have our equation. It says what's the x-intercept of the graph? Well, the graph touches the x-axis at 5. So my x-intercept is that t is equal to 5. And what does that mean in context of the problem? Well, t is equal to the number of weeks. So for the amount of the loan, the amount of money that Jackson owes his friend, for that to equal 0, it took 5 weeks. So interpretation, it took 5 weeks to pay off the loan. 5 weeks to pay back the loan. All right, let's do another one here. So Serenity filled up her car with gas before going on a long road trip. G is the number of gallons in the tank remaining after she had driven for T hours. So let me zoom in so I can see the graph. All right, so I want to write an equation for G. So let's use slope-intercept form. Now, the y-intercept of this problem is 11, so B is equal to 11. I want to get my slope. Now, I went down 1, and then I go right. Pay attention to our scale. I went right 1. So the slope here is negative 1. And so our equation needs to be in terms of G, because G is really the y, and T is the x. So we'd say G equals negative T plus 11. And it wants to know what's the y-intercept? Well, the y-intercept was 11. What does that mean in context of this problem? Well, so when T is equal to 0, G is equal to 11. Well, T is the number of hours we've driven. So if we haven't driven any hours and we have 11 gallons in the tank, that's how many gallons we started with. So that's the number of gallons in the tank to start with. Okay, let's do another one. So Naomi is driving from her house to City A without stopping. D represents her distance from City A after T hours from leaving her house. So D, the distance, is the vertical axis, and the length of the trip is the horizontal axis. T, we want to write the equation of D. So y equals mx plus b form. B would be the y-intercept, which is 200. So B is 200. And I want to find my slope, so I'm going to find another dot on the graph that's at a lattice point. We go down and over. So I went over 1, but I actually went down 50. I went from 200 to 150. So M is negative 50 over 1, which is negative 50. So my equation here would be D equals negative 50 times T plus 200. Now, because it's in slope-intercept form, the slope would be negative 50. What does this mean in context of the problem? Well, the distance here that we're given is in miles, and we're driving the number of hours. And the farther we drive, or the longer we drive, we keep deducting 50 miles for every 1 hour we drive. And so the 50 is the speed of the car. We're actually driving 50 miles per hour. So that is the speed that she's driving.